New Life. I'm Alex Rosa. I'm our lead pastor, and today we're going to be talking about how do we discover our one's stories. Pastor Barry did a wonderful job on the weekend talking about it. We're just going to go into a little bit more depth together. So how do we have a caring conversation where we learn someone's story? God is at work in their lives, so how can we figure out what they're about and what God is doing so we can join into that story? So the first thing we can focus on is let's not make the conversation about ourselves. One of the things that we help our small group leaders at New Life students learn is that if we want to be effective and getting to know people in the small group, we must ask more questions than we answer. And so think about it that way. Am I talking more than they're talking, or am I asking questions and hearing about what they're having to say? The other thing is we don't need to feel the need to relate with everyone's story. As people, we like to relate. And so if I tell you something about how I'm hurting because my knee got injured playing basketball, you might say, well, I played basketball before, or I have a hurt knee, or maybe my big toe got stubbed yesterday. And that's okay to do sometimes, but it's also helpful sometimes maybe if we can't relate, if we have never been where they're at, to even just say that, wow, I can't imagine that. I don't understand what that's like. Can you help me understand that a little bit more? And you can ask some follow-up questions that way. So it's okay to ask questions and to admit that we don't know all things about their life, and then to really listen. That's very healthy. And then if they ask us questions back though, so that usually happens in a conversation. I'm asking you a question about something. Hey, what did you do yesterday? You might ask me back, what did you do yesterday after you answer? That's okay too. And that's actually wonderful. It's one of the ways that we can help share how God is moving in our lives by answering those questions honestly and point to Jesus with our answers. And so while we're listening to their responses to our questions, we must be active listeners. Matt Bartlett, our Director of Student Ministries, talked about that last Wednesday, but let me just share a couple more things about that. He said this, and I think it's just good to remember. When we're in a conversation, we ought not to be constantly just thinking about what we want to say next. That's not even a good conversation. That's just you talking and then me talking. We might as well just be talking to a wall whenever that's happening. But if someone's talking, don't worry about what's going to happen next. We can rely on the Holy Spirit to guide us and move us in those ways. Let's just be completely into the story that they're telling so that we can be listening and showing we care in those ways. Also, people like to talk about themselves, so let's encourage that. Let's ask these open-ended questions. Again, Matt talked about that too. Not just yes or no questions like, did you like your weekend? Yes. Instead, we can say, what did you do on your weekend? Or what made you frustrated at work the other day? Or whatever. When we ask questions like that, it can land to more responses, and it help us to kind of get to know them better. So here's some just maybe sample questions that we could ask people, like, how did you and your spouse meet? It's usually a fun story, so let's ask that question. Or why are you in the profession you're in? How did you get into that job? Or where did you grow up, and why did you decide to move to where you're at right now? And a good question that you can ask really anyone is, where do you go to church? So usually in conversation, but especially because I work at a church, that comes up. And so a follow-up question sometimes I have is, hey, where do you go to church? And sometimes people say, I don't go to church anymore. I go, okay. And then you can say, why not? Or you can say, oh, all right. And you can keep moving, but it's a nice way to kind of discover some people's stories. I have a friend that I was with for lunch the other day, and we were talking a little bit about his story, and he actually asked me some good questions about how did I get involved in church. And so I kind of told him, and at the end of that I said, well, do you go to church? And he said, no, but my wife does. I said, oh, okay, where does she go? And he said, I don't know. And so, oh, hey, when you get home, ask her and then text me because I might know someone there. And so that was a way of us just to kind of get to know each other more. A couple other things when we're in a conversation, it's helpful to not be distracted while we're in the conversation. So that is part of active listening. But specifically, what I want to point out is, if we have a phone with us, and a lot of times we do have a phone, mine's in my office or else I'd be using it as an example right now. So pretend I have a phone. If I'm holding a phone right now, there's this distraction that I have because I'm wondering, am I going to get a text? Is there an email that I could look at? Is there a notification that's going on here? But also for you that are listening to me, you're not feeling like I care that much because I have this phone in my hand. But sometimes we do that just out of comfort. Like we're always near our phone. So the more it's out of the sight of the conversation, the more we're we're going to be invested, and they're going to know that we care about them too. So put that phone in your pocket or push it away on the table so that we're not even tempted to pick it up and look at it while we're discovering some stories. Another thing we can do is we can pray while we're in the conversation, while we're discovering the story. Ask God, hey, God, lead me. What do I say? And what question can I ask? And let the Holy Spirit really guide you. And sometimes He'll just bring things up to you to ask or to point in the conversation so that you can, again, point people to Jesus. And lastly, reflective responses. So when people are talking, have responses that include maybe something they say. So instead of just like shutting down their story or even just moving to the next question. So if I used to say like, hey, how did you move to this location? And you said, oh, it was for a job. And then I would ask, how did you meet your wife? That's not really a conversation there. That's an interview. And so instead, like respond to that, maybe ask some follow-up questions. So again, they see your heart in it because we want to know them, because we want to point them to Jesus. We want to show them the love of Jesus, and Jesus already loves them. And so we want to join in His work in their lives. And so even if someone says like, hey, I've had this hard time at work, instead of saying like, oh yeah, I have a hard time at work too. Instead of saying, oh, well, what was difficult? Or maybe how can I even support you in this? How can I pray for you? So it's a way that we can join in their story when we're asking those reflective questions. As always, at the end of all these videos, we want to encourage you, if you have questions about anything, whether it's discovering people's stories or developing relationships like we talked about next week, or even discerning next steps, which we talk about next week. If you have any questions, please put them below. In week 3, we're going to answer as many questions as we possibly can. But today's specific feedback question is this: what are some open-ended questions that you like or have used before or have heard from other people? So is there a specific question that you like to ask people about their life? Pastor Barry shared some this weekend. Is there one that sticks out from what he said that you enjoy? Share that below so that we can maybe even have this huge master list that helps us discover people's stories. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back on Wednesday to continue to learn how together we can reach our ones and bring God's kingdom here to earth.